Hello and welcome to the Unlucky Frog Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Porter. With me, co-host Charlotte Porter.
Hello.
And we're joined this Independence Day by James Naylor of Naylor Games.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Good.
It's a very debonair hello.
I like that. So you should introduce yourself each time.
You've got to have a podcast hello, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
really, really crucial.
Yeah, I think people are expecting sophistication now, though, James. So
you have to deliver.
Yeah.
So I'll in which case then I'll put on my best kind of accelerated RP accents for the remainder of this podcast, just to meet everybody's expectations and try and sound impossibly posh at points if I can.
Good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So the reason that James is on the show is, first of all, because he's a good guy. We thought, let's get him on the show.
We met him at Tabletop Scotland.
We did meet James at Tabletop Scotland at the playtest zone. We did.
Yeah.
But the reason that James was at the playtest zone is because he is currently working on a game called Magnate.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, yes.
So tell us a bit about Magnate.
Okay, so Magnate is I always find this quite challenging in terms of describing it, just to start. So apologies now if I don't give it the absolute best possible pitch that I can. But I will try to kind of describe it for you. So Magnate is a property theme board game. And in Magnate, each player is a property developer trying to make as much money as they can in a city that's going through a property boom. So what happens is different plots of land come up for sale, you buy those plots of land, and then you have to choose what you're going to build on the land. And kind of unlike a lot of games where it tends to be, if there's a building element to them, the idea is that, you like a classic Euro game, you're always building things like a mill here or a small factory there, and you build your building and it works straight away. But in Magnate, what it's trying to model is something a lot more like how property actually works. So rather than doing that, you build your building, but it's empty, and you have to try to attract tenants to move in. So the kind of core of the game is the idea that different locations are going to be attractive to different extents, to different kinds of tenants. So you're sort of strategically picking the right building for the right location, and then as you do that, you start accumulating more money from rent. You can start choosing to sell your buildings for sort of big cash lump sums. And the property market is heating up constantly in the game until the point at which, of course, like all property bubbles, it becomes completely unsustainable and a crash has to come. And when that happens, the game is going to end. But you can't tell exactly for certain when it's going to happen. So you have to kind of push your luck and work out based on everyone else's behavior when you think they might want to try and crash the market. And very simply, the person who manages to get out when the time is right and they make themselves the biggest pile of cash from property that they can, they're the winner.
There we go.
So it's capitalism, the game.
Capitalism, the board game. Basically, pretty much. Yeah.
So I think let's get the question out of the way right away. Is it like Monopoly?
Yes. The answer to this one is, this is great. This is actually the question that I most like getting. Yeah. Because actually, when I set out to create Magnate, that's exactly what I wanted to do. But I wanted to make like a good Monopoly. I wanted to give people the same feeling that they would have as children when they sort of got Monopoly out. And there's all this like holding cash in your hands and buying up lots of property and making loads of money. All the kind of really good stuff, right? But I wanted to actually make a good game out of that. So I actually, from the very beginning, that's sort of the dream feedback for me. And actually, recently I had some great feedback on it when several different people have said independently to me, without prompting from me, which is great, is that they've said, Magnate is the game that Monopoly should be.
I was just going to say that because I have heard from two separate people that playtested it at Tabletop Scotland that said it's the game Monopoly wants to be.
Yeah, well, I guess this is it, right? Is that the premise for Monopoly sounds good, but it just turns into a horrifying, experience that just makes you want to gouge your eyes out before it even actually comes to any sort of conclusion.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And I think in that sense, unfortunately, I would say that where my game loses to Monopoly is that Monopoly is actually more like capitalism than my in that that's exactly what happens. It goes on too long. Everyone, in the end, almost everyone else gets squeezed except for one person that does exceptionally well out of it. All those sort of things. There's a kind of terrible runaway leader problem, and it's dreadfully unfair. So, so for all those reasons, I feel like Monopoly actually looks more like a real property game in many ways, but actually is actually less like real life in that sense. But that's very much to its benefit. I should say.
So forgive me if you already know this, James, but I did a bit of reading up on Monopoly recently. And did you know that it was originally called the Landlord game, Charlotte?
No, I did not.
It was called the Landlord game, and it was originally designed to illustrate how the system did not work.
Oh,
it's very interesting history behind that.
Yeah, because it was I can't remember her name, but it was a lady who designed it, and the point was to illustrate that the capitalist system is broken because you end up with one person with all
running away
the stuff.
Yeah,
but it's a shame that message has been sort of lost and diluted. But as James says, in that way, Monopoly truly represents.
There's something about Monopoly though that, like, I've always enjoyed playing Monopoly. I don't think it's a great game, but I've enjoyed playing it. Apart from whenever I play it with certain people, it just becomes like the memories I have of the game is more about the screaming fight that ensued. Nothing to do with the game, just the total. It's like, why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we continue?
Counselling sessions and all of that.
Why do we continue to play this game year in, year out at Christmas to the same result?
Yeah. Totally ruining Jesus' birthday every time.
Like, no!
Yeah, sure.
Every single time. And yet, as you say, like, what's really amazing about it is that it happens every year regardless.
Yeah.
And that you think of all the different sets of different branded and themed sets of USAopoly make every year, and how families are consistently going through this same cycle, this sort of like tragic cycle where they can't learn, like a tragic hero, that every time the game will come to destroy any post-Christmas lunch family bliss will be obliterated when Monopoly comes out. Yeah,
pretty much.
It is truly a force for evil, Monopoly.
I always remember it would be that game that my dad would be like, right, you can bring it out, but only if there's no arguing. The minute there's an argument, it's just getting thrown away. And I remember there was even one time I think he did, like, he threw it off the table because he was like, I'm done.
Yeah, just table flip. That's it.
Like, right, okay.
I think that's how most games of Monopoly actually end. They should have that in the rulebook. As soon as someone flips the table, the game is over.
Well, I mean, mercifully, I think the good thing when someone flips the table over and just components go flying is that is going to at least bring an end to it.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, because one of the classic things about Monopoly is just like, particularly if you play it with the rules that are in the box, is just how just damn long it takes to play. There's no sense of like it being contained as a game.
Well, the last time that I played it, I don't remember any rage moment. It was just that, like, slowly but surely the players dropped off. Where someone was just like, I'm gonna make a cup of tea, and then never came back. And I think at one point I'm done. I'm tapping out. This is it, because it becomes a grind.
Yeah.
But the so to go back to Magnate, because we've waffled quite a bit about Monopoly. But to go back to Magnate, alluding to the origin story of Monopoly we discussed, where originally it was made to illustrate a point. But because of the capitalist themes of Magnate, and you alluded to the financial crash that is a game mechanic there, do you feel some responsibility when it comes to representing these things? Because I mean, as funny as it can be, and obviously we, in recent years we've heard a lot of satire about, financial corruption and crashes, but the reality is that for a lot of people, these sorts of events do spell tragedy. Do you feel some responsibility with representing these things in the game?
So I think that's a really interesting question. It's partly because I think that's a theme that I see just being discussed in general, not just in the context of something like capitalism or financial crashes in particular, but in the context of games in general. It's like how they deal with some sort of difficult themes. Being completely honest with Magnate, I sort of felt like a slight sense of duty to be somewhat realistic about it. So the way that the crash works is that the crash is inevitable. So the game there'll always be a market correction. That will never not happen. And I think people's fantasy that things can keep going up in price forever was something that I thought, in a way that would be entertaining, because I think that's important because it's a game. I wanted to embed that in the game. So the way the crash works. So the timing is never precise, but it is always going to happen inevitably. Because I guess in much the same way, the original intentions behind Monopoly was this idea of like, we want to represent this difference. And I believe when you mentioned it, I believe from my understanding of it, you could play originally either as tenants or as landlords.
Okay.
And basically the tenants always lost pretty much. And that's why, to be honest, the very first version of it wasn't a very good game. And so what the Parker brothers did was go, oh, this sucks how like one person always loses if they play the tenants. Let's just get rid of that bit and make it all about just landlords, because they realized that would make it more entertaining. So I sort of think to make the game still an enjoyable, entertaining experience, it's much the same way in Magnate. I wanted to bake that into it, but there's a kind of exciting mechanic around that. I think in terms of the wider social impacts of what that has, I just don't see that a game like Magnate is there to do that. It's not there to kind of encourage any kind of rampant consumer behavior or rather correct, rampant speculation. But at the same time, I don't think it's there to sort of explore that side of things. I mean, you could make a game about that, which could be very interesting. I'm sort of minded of to think a little bit of the game that I probably most want to play more than any other board game right now that I haven't, which is a game which you may have heard of called Holding On, the Troubled Life.
I knew you were going to say that as soon as you started talking about games dealing with these themes.
Because I think that is so fantastic, deciding to take on a theme like that in a game form. So I think you probably could do something, but I can't honestly say that Magnate is in any sense an attempt to genuinely deal with the sort of the social and real personal impacts of things like property crashes. It's more like what it's trying to embed and trying to get across is more of the idea that people will always be motivated by speculation, that people act in a herd mentality, which actually happens at the end of the game where you're kind of watching what everyone else is going to do. Is everyone going to rush in? And because markets are kind of irrational and people follow each other's lead all the time.
Yeah.
And then it captures that idea that the house prices cannot go on up indefinitely forever. That's more what I think it's trying to capture in that sense.
Sort of on that theme, we touched upon this in an earlier episode. I think we were talking about how sensitivity in approaching certain subjects. So obviously, when I was reading the blurb for Magnate, my first thought to Ben, I said, reminds me of SimCity, and I absolutely loved SimCity. But it's not done in the same sort of caricature way that SimCity is. And we started talking at the last episode about how you do get some games that sort of trivialise a lot of the issues, or they use it as a sort of gimmicky component.
Not necessarily deliberately.
Yeah. But I get the impression that that's maybe not something that Magnate's aiming to do. It's not aiming to lampoon or to try and take away.
Monopoly does that, right? Monopoly is essentially a cartooning of the whole landlord sector, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You say that. That's a really interesting point about the cartoony aspect of Monopoly, because you have in that this idea of people, all the different the cards you draw. There are obviously things like the stupidly comic cards, like the second prize in the beauty contest, but obviously things about the repairs and some of the landlord things associated with them. In Magnate, it is much more core. It is an economic game, which is built around the idea of property and how it actually works. So, things like the exact rental amounts people pay are not necessarily always very realistic, but that kind of thing. But it is basically pretty straightforwardly. It's just looking at that model and how that works. So it doesn't try to make it into a kind of comic thing. It should be fun and enjoyable. But in fact, one of the main goals for it is that actually when I see other city building board games, the one thing actually I've got to be honest that I find a bit frustrating about lots of them. One that I've seen, I've not played, but I'm really keen to play it, called Expandicity, for example, is that it's all very kind of colourful and looks kind of kiddie, and it's like, hey, we're going to build a city, but the bits are all kind of going to look a bit the same, and it's all very, very colourful. And actually, something with Magnate we've gone for example, I'm in the midst of having created right now, is the artwork for the board, which is kind of a lot more close to aerial photography. I've taken more of my inspiration from things like wargame art, because I wanted to have something that looked really kind of realistic, so that the city really grows before your eyes. I mean, for me, it's interesting you mentioned SimCity. For me, my favorite SimCity was probably SimCity 4, because it was the one that was the most realistic. It really went for like, this is what happens. Balancing a budget is really, really hard. In terms of a city, there are realistic social effects from education, crime, all these sort of things. And I in Magnate, I wanted a city that grows fairly realistically and that feels kind of real. So yes, that's kind of the approach that I've taken with it.
So on that subject, actually talking about, trying to create a sort of very realistic game, the prototype, I remember seeing the prototype at Tabletop Scotland, and
yes,
it drew my attention because the prototype, from what I remember correctly, had some Lego trees, some Monopoly money, and some other components that just looked fantastic. I don't know what it looked like, but it was so attention drawing. Yeah. It was great.
It was. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's certainly attention grabber as a black and white prototype. I mean, the Lego. It's at the moment, and I should just make sure for your listeners. Just to disappoint them maybe right now, that there won't be any Lego in the final version of it. It won't be made of Lego. Haven't won that license yet. We'll have to see how that goes, to see if Lego Group approach me and they say, James, we love Magnate, we want you to make a second edition in Lego. But the reason I chose Lego is because it's just incredible prototype material. And one of the things I was always really certain of from the start is that this game would have three-dimensional buildings, because there's a real, like in the games I have seen that have physical buildings or those kind of 3D objects in, there's a real aesthetic pleasure to the way that develops. It's why Expandicity has 3D buildings, even if it's got a very different kind of approach to design, color, and game design. So I thought, well, what's the material that I can use that will give that feeling in a really kind of fairly basic looking prototype and requires absolutely no hand-eye coordination whatsoever? Because I am terrible at craft stuff. I am so bad. I go on these groups, these Facebook groups for designers, and I see people making saying, "Hey, here's my prototype," and it's this beautiful. It's just this thing I threw together, and it's this lovely, gorgeous, illustrated thing. And I'm looking at it thinking, "Oh my god, I can't even come close to that." What I can do is just basic black and white lines using Adobe InDesign, and then I can make the buildings from Lego, because it requires no physical skill. It just requires some kind of slightly artistic way of capturing the essence of a building, which is something that I can do. So I figured that would be a great prototype material. And it's proven really successful, because when I take it to conventions and I put it out there, it's very eye-catching compared to lots of prototypes, because they see this big cluster of buildings in the middle of the table and they're like, what's that? A good example happened to me actually at Tabletop Scotland, when I got to have some children playing the game for the first time. And I was really keen to have more children as playtesters, because they came to table and there were several games out there. And actually, there wasn't a single bad-looking prototype among them. They all look reasonable. But at the end of the day, mine sprawled across half a table, and it had this huge cluster of Lego buildings in the middle and piles of paper cash. And the parents said, "Now, which one of these games would you like to play?" And I can tell you from that moment, I knew they were going to play Magnate, because they just looked at that and they were like, clearly the Lego one.
The Lego one, you idiot, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I've got this. It's so and it was brilliant, actually. I have to say, just to add to that, when they actually played it, because they whooped their parents. The two dads were obliterated. And the funny thing was, I was sat next to one of them. I was trying to help him out. He was kind of playing. He was trying to win. Like, he wasn't just going to be like, "Oh, let the kids win." But they were so good at just like, I think Magnate's has got a bit of maths in it, but it's very basic arithmetic that you have to do. And I think if you're I think these children were maybe about 9 or 10. And I think if you're at school, you're kind of used to doing lots of arithmetic that you get out of the habit of as an adult. And
I was just going to say, in general, for anyone out there who is planning to play a game with a child, never underestimate a child's ability to grasp the game mechanics. Seriously, it's a bit scary at times how quickly kids can pick up games.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. And they picked it up and they loved it. Like it was so great. Like I'd like give them like I was being the bank, and I was like, here's give them 2 million. They just sold this building, and handing the 2 million cash over to them for their housing development. And then one of them just turned to the other because they were kind of playing as a team, and they just said, look, we've got more money than we can count. It's great. They are loving this so hard. They have totally committed to this, which is just great.
So, returning to what you'd said near the beginning of the show about with Magnate, how you wanted to sort of fix monopoly, it's something that we've heard a couple of designers say actually, because certainly with Kitty Cataclysm, which Bez Shariari's working on at the moment, she said that she liked Flux, but hated the fact that it didn't have a definitive runtime.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So she sought to create a game that was similar and also solve that problem. But with that sort of design philosophy, do you risk creating a game that's defined more by what it's not than having any sort of defining character of its own?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think inevitably it will be seen as somewhat in response to something, and I think it kind of depends what the game is. I think if you were, I think in a funny way, it being, for example, I mean, I think Kitty, what's it called again? Remind me what the I can Cataclysm.
Cataclysm, yeah.
Kitty Cataclysm.
This tripped Josh up for ages. One he was calling it Cataclysm for a while. He's called it Clitty Cataclysm as well.
There are some unfortunate combinations around that. Which don't bear talking about, but that's Kitty Cataclysm, all right. So that's I think it's. I mean, firstly, I think Bez, she's a brilliant designer. I think that's the first thing I want to say is that's really. I just to say that's. I think it's really interesting that also she decided to do that in response to kind of Flux. Mm-hmm. I think in both cases, but maybe even more so, to be honest, with Monopoly. That the thing is that is a game which will probably never be equaled in terms of awareness.
Yeah.
So no one will ever create a game that will be like bigger than Monopoly, realistically.
Certainly awareness, it will be surpassed quite comfortably in just about every other respect.
Oh yeah, in like every other way. People's general awareness. So if you release a game and then people say, and they only talk about it in relation to Monopoly, there isn't really a better thing for them to talk about it in relation to. Yeah. Because it's like if your game becomes famous for being the game that everyone goes, don't play Monopoly, play this. I think that's brilliant. That would secure an absolutely vast uptake if that's genuinely what people were saying all the time. So from my point of view, I think I know it will be very different. I'm very confident in its mechanics and its design, and the experience that it gives people, and this is that it sort of delivers on that childhood promise of Monopoly. At least that's what several people have now said to me, which was kind of my design goal. And I must admit, it's been very humbling and flattering to finally to kind of hear that. So I think in some ways the association with Monopoly are kind of already there already. So I'm kind of very happy for it to be people to define it in relation to Monopoly. I think from my point of view, because I know it will come off very good and come off very well in that comparison.
So what sort of stage are you at with the development of Magnate?
So this is another really good question, because I sort of feel like it's really hard sometimes to describe what the stages of these kind of development is. So I'll attempt to describe where I am with it. I suspect if you're a really experienced publisher, you probably have some really clear milestones that the things are at. The state I'm at Magnate at the moment is that I think about it in a few different streams. I guess one of them is the game itself. And the game itself is now really reaching a pure balancing stage. So fundamentally, it works really quite well. It delivers on its design goals. It creates a good experience. People are saying really nice things about it, having a lot of fun playing it. But because it's a sort of mid-weight strategy game, you need to play a lot of times before you discover there are any issues with balancing. So things like that is what I'm kind of keeping an eye on. Like, should this building have a slightly higher capacity? Should this building have a slightly lower cost? Those kinds of questions, which you can't really know a priori, even if you were a maths genius. You would find it really hard to predict that because of the number of different variables going on. So it's a sort of balancing stage. However, on a completely separate production track, I'm in the middle of assembling the first ever kind of pretty prototype. So the first one that will kind of resemble a final product in some way. Because my design approach to this stuff is like, again, which helps because I'm so crap at craft things, is being really minimal for as long as possible. So I don't put any really effort into the design and the art, except where I think it might be important to evoke a certain thing, and then get the game as good as it can be before going into production. And so with Magnate, right now we're finally at the stage where the art it makes sense to start creating the art, and in fact it's pretty manic right now. So in 7 days. We have to be setting up for Tabletop Live at Alexandra Palace. We'll be demoing the pretty prototype of Magnate for the first time ever.
Because I did see on your blog some of the graphics or some of the images that you were working towards with the buildings. You'd shared, I think it was like a town hall or something.
Yeah.
And that's looking really good.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so that's actually that one's even come a little bit further now. So it looks even more like a kind of, that one's modeled on is like a late 18th century, early 19th century American town hall, kind of city hall. So it's like a mixture of brickwork with Roman kind of style white colonnades.
Yes.
So so thank you very much for that. Yes, one of the key things is that we know is to put effort into buildings. I don't know if the buildings are really going to be quite there yet, but actually the way I see this is a bit of a bridge for me between a traditional board game and a miniatures game, because I think, and this is a complete experiment, I could turn out to be utterly wrong about this, but I think if we make the buildings nice enough, they will have an appeal for hobby board gamers that kind of just goes beyond the components, in the sense that I think people, if they're detailed enough, people will actually enjoy painting them and actually making them, kind of customizing them a bit to what they want to do with them. So I think that's sort of an area where, I wanted to put that kind of effort into it. So those 3D buildings have now been printed, and they are currently being resin casts are being made of them, so that we'll have the first models on the stand on Saturday, not tomorrow, but the next Saturday.
Yeah. I mean, as much as people do scoff at it, I mean, you look at the success of Rising Sun. Yeah. Loads of people bought that just for the miniatures. They are stunning miniatures. They are. But it was funny because like people got Rising Sun and then were kind of surprised that it was actually a good game. Like, I've got all these cool miniatures, and it's a good game to boot. So yeah, there you go. I don't think there's anything wrong with making your game look pretty.
So just on that, you'd mentioned that you're obviously going to be playtesting it. Have you got any other conventions or any other events lined up where you'll be playtesting?
So in terms of actual playtesting, in terms of tweaking it, the not anything booked in the diary now, but the kind of next step I'm doing is I've got a few kind of individuals that I want to test it with, and I want to start setting up regular playtesting in board game cafes, particularly ones in London. It's been brilliant doing a bit of a mini tour around the country. So I did ManaCon in Leicester, I did HandyCon in Berkshire, and then I did sort of finish with Tabletop Scotland. But to be honest, like obviously the cost racks up pretty quickly for doing that. So I probably will, for the next few months, keep it mostly London based. But there are now so many board game cafes opening in London that there should be enough venues to sort of take it to. And that's I'm just trying. I need to work that out. At the moment, I'm currently being pulled so much into the production side in terms of all the art, the graphic design, the 3D buildings, and the marketing stuff around that. Because as well as Tabletop Live will be demoed first, that's kind of in some ways still just the warm-up act, because we're taking it to Essen. And when we're there, we're there 4 days. We've got a stand. We'll have two games running, hopefully simultaneously, constantly. So kind of most of my efforts at the moment are going into making sure we have the best Essen that we can. Because it's not cheap. And I think we felt like, well, you've got to do it one day, so let's do it this year rather than wait till next year. But it has made the timeline pretty tough, to be honest.
I feel your pain there. So, and as far as bringing the game to market, what's the plan?
So, current plan is firstly, those playtesting events will probably continue because it'll help me with balancing, but at the same time, I guess it just exposes people to the game. We've got the two big shows coming up, so Tabletop Live and then Essen. And then probably we'll be looking to do Kickstarter in March time next year. That's the current timeline we're looking at, because a big thing for me is that like I've got very good feedback from the game. I want it to be as successful at Kickstarter, of course, as it can be. And I think there's just a sort of minimum momentum that you need to build up in order to make sure you have a really successful Kickstarter.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
for me, that's really what building that momentum is about. In terms of conventions next year, what we might do is one of the ones I thought about is maybe doing Gamma, just because I think retailers are going to be interested from day one, because it's a very, very accessible theme for a wider market. You know, it's property, it's lovely physical buildings. It looks really nice. Price point is going to be something we're going to need to work through, I think, to make sure we can make a version that can be retailed. Because again, Kickstarter version, there is going to definitely be a deluxe one that's going to have all the bells and whistles. There would never be we'd never be able to afford to build a completely, absolutely everything version for retail. But actually, I see this quite as a long-term thing. I think this game has huge potential to do very well in retail because it has a very accessible theme. The idea of buildings, the fact that it is in response to such a famous game in many ways, I can see retailers kind of going for that, and I can see some real opportunities for really meaningful localization as well. You know, just as you have things like USAopoly, where you have lots of different local versions in different cities, you know, you could do a European-style city of Magnate. To begin with, it's deliberately in America. It's like a small American city. You could have larger cities with larger buildings. You could have buildings that are like modern buildings, but the kind of like really more adventurous type skyscraper structures that you have in, for example, modern Asian cities, for example. There's so much potential for it kind of the long term, I think. So the way that I see it is that like the Kickstarter is what makes it happen. And then after that, it's actually about taking it really far. And I think it's a game that because of the accessibility of its theme, because of its kind of middle weight, I think it's something that will appeal to people who want something a little bit more sophisticated than the very gateway games, but also something that will appeal enough, has enough depth to it. The hobby board gamers will still be able to play it time after time and still enjoy it. So for me, it's all about just building that marketing momentum up to the Kickstarter and the product quality being paramount as well, making sure that's the very best thing that it can be.
When you're talking about all the different styles, you could do an expansion that is Brutalism. I am from Cumbernauld. I don't know if you know of Cumbernauld.
I do not.
Consecutively won the Carbuncle Award, which is the worst designed town.
Yes.
And it's won it like 7 years in a row. And Billy Connolly refers to it as the concrete jungle.
It looks like arse. The thing is, concrete jungle makes it sound quite exotic.
It's not. At all.
It's like some dystopic nightmare.
But I could just envision it, and I thought that's what I would buy that. I would so buy just to have that.
I've said dystopic nightmare, but even now I'm thinking that implies that it's somehow exciting in some way.
No, it's not. It's grey. It's grey and concrete.
Yeah.
And yet somehow a miniature version with lots of lovely map tiles and loads of pieces like that could be wonderful. So wonderful. I honestly think, like, I mean, I why not? I mean, if you've got a particular building style, if it actually can be made to look quite aesthetic, so when you sit on a table, maybe less in real life, then actually, why not? I mean, you've got something potentially special. There are loads of big Brutalism fans out there. So why not? That's what I'd say.
Magnate Cumbernauld edition.
Yeah, exactly. It might be a few we need to work through first of major expansions. Maybe the New York one will come a little bit ahead.
Yes. But if you have it, like you said, you don't know Cumbernauld, Google it just to give you a sense.
Yeah.
It was phenomenal in the 70s, but it still looks that way. It's that sort of way that it's never
the town that time forgot.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And that concrete beat to death.
Yeah. I mean, it's not so incredibly different from Croydon, where I'm based. Yeah. Because that went through a similar huge period in the 60s, and that has definitely been some kind of influence on me in terms of creating Magnate. That kind of rampant property construction thing.
It's like every architectural committee in the 70s was like, do you know what's great? Concrete.
Yeah.
Pour it on everything.
Yeah, let's just make everything from concrete from now on. Because it's great.
Yeah.
They're probably like this. I always think that they must have seen it, like lots of examples of those kind of modernist buildings being built in places like Los Angeles in the 50s and 60s. And they thought, oh, that looks really nice in the sunshine. And they haven't thought about the fact in Britain where it's raining all the time and it gets covered in horrible streaky stuff all the time, just like the acid rain eating it away at it, that actually it will look terrible really fast.
Yeah. They get slimy. That's the thing. They actually get slimy.
So see, anytime anyone's listening has someone hating on them, like, oh, your generation, this and that, just remind those old codgers that there was a time where they decided it would be a great idea to make everything out of concrete. So who's the real idiot?
Well, absolutely.
Anyway, on that note, I think we can draw this podcast to a close. Very quickly, James, for people who are interested in Naylor Games and Magnate,
Yes.
Where should they go?
So if you want to check out Magnate, just go to magnategame.com. You can sign up there to hear about the Kickstarter. It's got more information about the game. We also have our page now on Board Game Geek as well, so feel free to check that out. There's some more information I'm gradually putting up there. And then if you want to learn more about the process behind Magnate and read some of my articles about where I kind of go into sometimes quite deep analysis on different board game mechanics, then naylorgames.com is the place that you want to go. I update that with a new post each week, like I say, on all sorts of sort of board game related subjects.
There we have it.
Fantastic. Yeah.
James Naylor, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be on the show.
And for all of our listeners, wherever you are, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
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 Hi guys, it's Josh from the Unlucky Frog Gaming Podcast here. Thanks for listening to us, and now be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for the Unlucky Frog Gaming. You can also show your support for Unlucky Frog through Patreon. Be sure to check out our website www.unluckyfrog.com to find out more.
Was that so hard?
Look...